the first total ban on minors on social media. But it isn't the first global effort seeking to regulate children's online screen time and protect their mental health. In fact, many parts of Europe have a minimum age to create social media accounts without parental consent. In Belgium and Norway, it is 13 years. In Italy, it's 14, and in France, 16. And there are growing calls to beef up existing standards amid a lack of enforcement. The U.S. state of California banning tech firms from pushing so-called addictive feeds to children without parental consent from 2027. Platforms are also barred from sending minors notifications at night or during school hours. The UK's Online Safety Act requires tech firms to shield children from toxic or inappropriate content, or they could face a hefty fine of nearly $23 million, or 10% of their annual global turnover. And some platforms have even pushed back. They say that verifying children's ages online without obtaining data is not yet technologically feasible. China has circumvented this problem by requiring users to register with their real names and national identification numbers. The Chinese version of TikTok, which is Douyin, also has a teen mode, which restricts content seen by children younger than 14. Usage is also limited to 40 minutes before 10 p.m. each day. So Australia's ban has encouraged governments to make a renewed push for stronger protections against the impact of social media on children. But they also face a delicate balancing act between preserving privacy rights, protecting children's mental health, and allowing online freedoms. With more, joining us is Professor Amanda Third, who's co-director at the Young and Resilient Research Centre of Western Sydney University. It's good to see you, Professor Third. We know that you signed the open letter to the Prime Minister that outlined reasons why this ban is, in a nutshell, too blunt an instrument to address risks effectively. So many points were covered in your letter, but which argument do you believe in the most?
Well, I think very quickly, Yasmin, I think the one of the key reasons that we came out against this ban is because we don't believe that it's going to strengthen children's online safety. And it won't do that because by evicting children from social media platforms, you effectively take away all incentive for technology platforms to design for children and to make sure that they can be safe online and have strong and productive experiences. And so what will happen, we believe, is that children will find ways to circumvent the legal restrictions. They'll end up in spaces that are darker, less well regulated and not designed for them. And they'll be unable to reach out for the sort of help they might need when they do inevitably get into trouble because they will be doing something illegal. This is one of the key reasons. I think it doesn't strengthen children's online safety. It potentially exacerbates the risks of harm they face. But then there's also a very, very significant opportunity cost for all the many benefits that children and young people aged 13 to 16 derive from engaging with social media.
I want to talk about how quickly the law was passed in Australia. And we know young people weren't consulted. How important is it to involve young people in these discussions? And how could including them have led to better, more thoughtful policy?
Yeah, look, from my perspective, it's absolutely critical that we ask children and young people to inform the design of strategies to better protect them and enable them in online spaces. I think this legislation has indeed been very rushed, and indeed it's worth saying carefully that I have questioned the extent to which children's and young people's interests have really driven this. It does seem that it's been driven primarily by political and economic interests domestically. But we do need to be designing with children and young people because they, unlike any other adult on the planet, really understand what it's like to grow up in a world that is fully structured by digital technologies. They are, if you like, the very best experts on the variety of different ways that they conceive their identity, the practices they undertake, etc., etc. And really, without this deep understanding of children's digital practices, we are not going to be able to develop effective regulations and thereby address the concerns of the many parents who have gotten behind, initiatives like the bans.
So, what other solutions beyond a ban would you have liked to have seen? What other ways are there then to regulate platforms more effectively?
Oh, no, look, I think that regulation is absolutely one of the key strategies. But my problem is that the regulation that we've just passed through Parliament is not regulation that's going to do the job we need it to do. Alongside this ban on social media for under-16s, there are two other really key policy developments. One is a statutory duty of care, which would call technology platforms to account for children's protection in online spaces. And the second one is a children's privacy code, which would ensure that children's data and privacy can genuinely be protected. These are the kinds of regulatory instruments we need, fine-grained, targeted regulatory instruments that actually intersect meaningfully with the challenges that children and young people are facing online. Unfortunately, the ban that's been pushed through has really largely been in response to parents' very understandable anxieties about their children's digital practices online. But the ban is not a solution that will go all the way towards addressing those parents' anxieties.
And when the ban does kick in sometime in the next year, what unforeseen problems do you expect?
Well, Yasmin, I think my biggest concern is that children will be forced into those darker, more unregulated spaces, and that we will see a heightened risk of harm. But I guess the other thing that I'm very concerned about is that opportunity cost. I think what we have not recognised in this debate is the very deep ways that social media is integrated into children's and young people's everyday experiences, the ways that it shapes their identities. They use it to seek for information, to learn new skills, to educate themselves, and importantly, they learn about, self-organize and take action on the many issues that impact their everyday lives. We're really putting large barriers in the ways of children's, meaningful engagement in public life, right at a moment in history where arguably we confront very large, intractable challenges such as climate change, which will impact children's and young people's futures, and we're not giving them mechanisms to engage in those debates and contribute their views and perspectives. And given that they are disproportionately affected by some of the big crises that we face as a global society, I think this is a great travesty and something we need to be really wary of. The Australian government is yet to answer the question around how they will enable children and young people to participate in democratic process. And I think that's a question that urgently needs addressing.
I know this law has just been passed, but I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you think and believe that this ban will hold.
Well, I think the next 12 months will be critical to really understanding whether or not we can give this new piece of legislation the kind of regulatory bark that it needs in order to make a difference to the ways that we currently hold technology platforms to account. I do worry that there are significant loopholes. There is an exemptions framework which needs to be thought through very carefully Already the government is saying that some platforms rather than others will be exempt and so on. But really the devil will be in the detail, and as to whether or not it can play a meaningful role in holding technology companies to account is anyone's guess. I think one of the things I'm very concerned about is that over the next 12 months we find ways to make sure that this new piece of legislation does not punch holes in those other important regulatory instruments that that are there to protect children and young people. And obviously we're going to need to complement these regulatory moves with widespread education and a whole range of other strategic initiatives to ensure that children and young people's everyday rights are not compromised.
Appreciate your time with us here on CNA. Thank you, Professor Amanda Third, co-director at the Young and Resilient Research Centre of Western Sydney University.